she looked like an easy target. Until they found out about her military training. A story by Heartfelt Tales. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the cafeteria as Emma Rodriguez's thermos hit the floor, her grandmother's homemade pozole spilling across the white tiles like spilled blood. Above her, 3 senior boys laughed with the cruel satisfaction of predators who had cornered their prey. They had no idea that the quiet girl crouched on the floor, carefully collecting the broken pieces, possessed the tactical skills to neutralize armed hostiles and had been trained by the world's most elite military operatives since she was 14 years old. Emma Santos had arrived at Lincoln High 3 months ago, and each day felt like surviving behind enemy lines. Her father's classified military assignments had taken their family across the globe, but more importantly, Emma had been selected for Project Phoenix, a covert program that identified exceptional teenagers for accelerated military training. While her classmates worried about pop quizzes and prom dates, Emma had spent her summers learning advanced combat techniques, psychological warfare, and crisis management alongside future Navy SEALs and Delta Force operatives. But none of that preparation had equipped her for the particular battlefield of suburban high school social hierarchies. "Oops," sneered Marcus Thompson, the captain of the wrestling team whose massive frame cast a shadow over Emma's small figure. "Looks like the little mouse spilled her weird foreign soup everywhere." Emma's breathing remained controlled, her heartbeat steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. Threat assessment activated automatically. 3 hostiles, Marcus at 6'2" and approximately 200 pounds, flanked by his lieutenants Jake Morrison and Tyler Wells. Multiple exit routes available, civilian witnesses present, escalation protocols unnecessary. She could have all 3 on the ground in under 30 seconds without causing permanent injury, but her training had taught her something more valuable than combat techniques: discipline. "It's pozole," Emma said quietly, her voice barely audible above the continuing laughter that rippled through the surrounding tables. "My grandmother's recipe." "Pozole?" Jake mocked, pulling out his phone to record. "What is that, like Mexican dog food or something? No wonder you're so weird, eating that garbage would mess anyone up." Tyler kicked at the spreading puddle with his designer sneaker, grinding fragments of the broken thermos deeper into the linoleum. "Dude, it smells like a gas station bathroom in here now. Can't you eat normal food like everyone else?" Emma continued collecting the larger pieces of her shattered thermos, each movement precise and economical. In her mind, she calculated 17 different ways to disable Tyler's phone, 14 methods to neutralize Jake's recording, and approximately 43 techniques to render Marcus unconscious using only the broken thermos pieces. Instead, she stood slowly, her movements carrying an unconscious military bearing that made several nearby students pause their conversations. "I'm sorry for the mess," she said, her tone remaining respectful despite the fury building behind her calm exterior. "I'll clean it up." Marcus stepped closer, using his size to intimidate. This was a mistake. Emma's training had conditioned her to view physical intimidation as a tactical error that revealed weakness rather than strength. She had faced down instructors who could kill her with their bare hands, had endured psychological pressure designed to break military professionals. A teenage bully trying to use his height advantage was almost laughably amateur. "Yeah, you better clean it up," Marcus said, his voice carrying the entitled arrogance of someone who had never faced real consequences. "And maybe next time, bring food that doesn't stink up the whole cafeteria. This isn't some third world country, we have standards here." The casual racism hit Emma harder than any physical blow could have. Her grandmother had fled violence in El Salvador, had worked 3 jobs to put Emma's mother through school, had poured decades of love and tradition into recipes like the pozole now soaking into the cafeteria floor. Emma felt something dangerous stirring in her chest, not fear, but a cold, tactical fury that her instructors had warned her about. She looked up at Marcus, and for just a moment, he caught a glimpse of something behind her dark eyes that made him take an involuntary step backward. It was the look of someone who had seen real violence, who understood the difference between playground posturing and actual threat assessment. My grandmother came to this country with nothing, Emma said, her voice still soft but carrying an undertone that silenced the surrounding tables. She worked 16-hour days in textile factories so her children could have better lives. She taught herself English by watching soap operas and reading newspapers she found in the trash. Every recipe she shared with me carries the history of our family, the strength of women who survived things you couldn't imagine. She stood fully upright now, and despite being nearly a foot shorter than Marcus, something about her posture made the distance between them feel insignificant. So when you mock her food, when you call it garbage, you're not just insulting me. You're insulting a woman who has more strength, courage, and dignity in her little finger than you'll develop in your entire life. The cafeteria had grown quiet around them. Jake's phone was still recording, but his smirk had faded. Tyler was no longer grinding his foot into the spill. Marcus's face had flushed red, caught between embarrassment and anger. "Who do you think you are?" Marcus snarled, his voice rising. "You come into our school, eating your weird food, acting all mysterious and better than everyone else. You're nothing special. You're just another weird immigrant girl who doesn't belong here." Emma's training kicked into overdrive. Hostile escalation detected. Multiple de-escalation protocols available. Physical intervention authorized if necessary. But beneath the tactical analysis, she felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood, genuine hurt. Not at the insults to herself, but at the dismissal of her heritage, her family, everything that made her who she was. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small photo, her grandmother at age 16, standing outside the factory where she had worked her first job in America. The woman in the picture looked remarkably like Emma, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had survived war, poverty, and displacement. "This is my grandmother," Emma said, holding the photo so Marcus could see it. Maria Santos. She arrived in Los Angeles in 1967 with $11 and the clothes on her back. She couldn't speak English, didn't know anyone, had no idea how she was going to survive. But she did more than survive, she built a family, a life, a legacy. Emma's voice remained calm, but it carried an authority that commanded attention from everyone within earshot. "She taught me that strength isn't about making other people feel small. It's about lifting others up, even when the world tries to break you down. She taught me that courage isn't about picking fights with people who can't fight back. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "She also taught me that the toughest people are often the quietest ones. The ones who have survived real hardship don't need to prove how strong they are by bullying others. They prove it by building something better." Marcus's friends were beginning to look uncomfortable. The recorded confrontation wasn't going the way they had expected. Instead of the shy girl breaking down or getting angry, they were witnessing something that felt more like a lesson than an argument. "But here's what my grandmother didn't teach me," Emma continued, taking a step closer to Marcus. "Here's what I learned from other teachers, in other places, doing other things that you couldn't comprehend." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow everyone in the cafeteria could hear her clearly. "I learned that people who use their size, their popularity, their privilege to hurt others aren't strong. They're afraid. They're so terrified of their own weakness that they need to create weakness in others to feel powerful. And that kind of fear makes you predictable. Exploitable. Vulnerable." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Emma held up a hand with such casual authority that the words died in his throat. "I'm not finished," she said simply. "You want to know what makes someone truly dangerous? It's not size, or anger, or the ability to intimidate. It's discipline. Training. The knowledge that you could end a threat in seconds, combined with the wisdom to know when not to. It's understanding that real power comes from protecting people, not preying on them." She bent down and picked up the last pieces of her broken thermos, handling even the sharp fragments with the careful precision of someone trained in weapons handling. "I could have responded to your behavior in ways that would have ended this confrontation very quickly," Emma said, straightening up to face Marcus again. But my grandmother didn't sacrifice everything she had so I could waste my education fighting bullies in a high school cafeteria. She taught me to be better than that. Emma turned to leave, then paused and looked back over her shoulder. Oh, and Marcus? Next time you want to pick on someone you think is weak and defenseless, you might want to make sure you know who you're dealing with first. Some of us have been taught by people who actually know what strength looks like. The silence that followed Emma's departure was deafening. Jake slowly lowered his phone, the video he had intended to use for humiliation having captured something entirely different. Tyler shuffled awkwardly, no longer meeting anyone's eyes. Marcus stood frozen, his usual confidence completely shattered by an encounter that had gone nothing like he expected. Word of the cafeteria confrontation spread through Lincoln High like wildfire, but not in the way the bullies had intended. Instead of mockery, students shared clips of Emma's quiet dignity, her defense of her grandmother's memory, and her mysterious hints about training and capabilities that went far beyond typical teenage experience. Emma, meanwhile, continued her routine as if nothing had happened. She attended classes, completed assignments, and maintained the low profile that her father's security clearance required. But other students began to notice things they had missed before, the way she moved with unconscious precision, how she seemed to catalog exits and potential threats in every room, the fact that she never seemed startled or caught off guard by anything. David Chen, a quiet junior who had often been targeted by Marcus's group, was the first to approach Emma directly. "That was incredible," he said, finding her in the library during lunch period. "How did you stay so calm? If someone had been treating me like that, I would have completely lost it." Emma looked up from her chemistry textbook, studying David's earnest face. "Losing control means losing," she said simply. "If I had gotten angry, if I had fought them, they would have won. They would have proven that I was everything they said I was. But you're not like other people our age, are you?" David asked. "The way you handled that situation, the things you said about training and teachers, there's more to your story." Emma closed her book and considered how much to reveal. Her training had emphasized operational security, maintaining cover identities, and protecting classified information. But it had also taught her to assess trustworthiness and build strategic alliances when necessary. "My father works in defense," she said carefully. "I've spent time in specialized educational programs, learning things that most teenagers don't learn. Skills that I hope I'll never need to use, but that give me perspective on what real threats look like." David's eyes widened. "Like military training? Like learning that the toughest people I've ever met would never waste their time bullying someone in a high school cafeteria," Emma said. "Real warriors protect people. They don't prey on them." Over the following weeks, Emma noticed subtle changes in the school's social dynamics. Marcus and his friends kept their distance, their usual confidence replaced by uncertainty about what they might be dealing with. Other students, inspired by Emma's example, began standing up to bullying behavior they had previously ignored or endured. Emma started eating lunch in the library, partly for peace and quiet, but increasingly because other students sought her out. Kids who had been bullied, students struggling with family problems, even former bullies who wanted to understand how to be better. She found herself becoming an unofficial counselor, using the psychological training from her military education to help her peers navigate their challenges. "Why do you think Marcus and his friends picked on you specifically?" asked Sarah Martinez, a sophomore who had been dealing with her own bullying situation. Emma considered the question while unwrapping the sandwich her grandmother had packed, a simple meal that had replaced the more elaborate traditional foods that had made her a target. "Because I was different," Emma said. "New, quiet, eating unfamiliar food, not fitting into their predetermined social categories. People like Marcus pick on difference because they're afraid of anything that challenges their understanding of how the world should work." "But you weren't afraid of him," Sarah observed. "Even when he was trying to intimidate you." "I was afraid," Emma admitted. "Not of him, he couldn't actually hurt me. But I was afraid of what I might do if I lost control. My training taught me capabilities that could cause serious harm. The real challenge wasn't dealing with Marcus. It was making sure I responded appropriately, proportionally, in a way that solved the problem without creating bigger ones. This conversation, like many others, helped Emma understand something her instructors had never directly taught her, that her greatest strength wasn't her combat training or tactical knowledge, but her ability to remain human despite having been trained for inhuman situations. As winter turned to spring, Emma's influence at Lincoln High continued to grow in unexpected ways. She started a peer mediation program, using conflict resolution techniques she had learned in hostage negotiation training. She organized self-defense workshops that focused more on awareness and de-escalation than physical techniques, though students noticed she moved with a fluidity and precision that suggested extensive martial arts background. Most importantly, she began sharing stories about her grandmother, not just the pozole recipe that had started everything, but the full narrative of a woman who had shown true courage by building a life from nothing, who had defined strength as the ability to nurture and protect rather than to dominate and destroy. The turning point came in May, when a new student named Roberto Gutierrez arrived from Honduras. Like Emma months earlier, he brought traditional food, spoke with an accent, and seemed overwhelmed by the social complexity of American high school life. And like Emma, he quickly attracted the attention of students looking for someone different to target. Emma watched the familiar pattern beginning to develop and made a decision that would have surprised her military instructors with its tactical boldness. Instead of intervening directly, she organized something unprecedented at Lincoln High, a cultural celebration where students were encouraged to share traditional foods, family stories, and heritage with their classmates. The event, initially met with skepticism, became one of the most popular gatherings in the school's recent history. Students discovered that the weird foods they had mocked were actually delicious, that their classmates' family histories were filled with remarkable stories of courage and resilience, and that difference was something to celebrate rather than suppress. Marcus Thompson, who had spent months avoiding Emma since their cafeteria confrontation, surprised everyone by approaching her at the cultural celebration. "I wanted to apologize," he said, his usual swagger replaced by genuine awkwardness. "Not just for that day with your lunch, but for everything. The way I treated you, the things I said about your family, about your food. It was wrong." Emma studied his face, using the psychological assessment skills she had learned to evaluate sincerity. "What changed?" she asked. Marcus looked around the crowded gymnasium, where students were sharing stories and foods from dozens of different cultures. "I guess I started paying attention. Really listening to people instead of just looking for ways to put them down. And I realized that the things that made you different, your grandmother's strength, your family's history, even that pozole, those weren't weaknesses. They were what made you interesting. Special." He paused, struggling with words he had never learned to say. "I think I was jealous," he admitted. "Your confidence, the way you handled yourself, the fact that you clearly came from somewhere with real meaning and tradition. My family doesn't have stories like that. We've just always had money and status, but we never had to fight for anything, never had to be really strong." Emma felt a moment of genuine sympathy for the boy who had tormented her. "Strength isn't about what you've survived," she said. "It's about what you choose to do with whatever experiences you've had. Your privilege could be a tool for helping others instead of a weapon for hurting them. Is that what your training taught you?" Marcus asked. "How to see things differently." Emma smiled, thinking of her grandmother's weathered hands teaching her to fold empanadas, and of drill sergeants teaching her to disarm explosive devices. "My training taught me a lot of things. But the most important lesson came from my grandmother, that real strength is about building something better, not tearing other people down." As graduation approached, Emma reflected on her year at Lincoln High. She had arrived as an outsider carrying classified training and a cover identity that isolated her from normal teenage experiences. She had faced cruelty that tested not her physical capabilities but her emotional resilience and moral character. But she had also discovered something her military instructors had never anticipated, that the skills they had taught her for warfare could be adapted for peacebuilding. That tactical thinking could be used to solve social problems. That the discipline required to be a warrior could also be used to be a healer. At the graduation ceremony, Emma was recognized not only for her academic achievements but for her role in transforming Lincoln High's culture around diversity and inclusion. As she stood at the podium to address her classmates, she looked out at faces that had become familiar over the months. Roberto, who had thrived in an environment where his heritage was celebrated rather than mocked. Sarah, who had found her voice and become a leader in the peer mediation program. Even Marcus, who had used his influence to protect rather than prey on other students. 8 months ago, Emma began, her voice carrying clearly through the gymnasium. I arrived at Lincoln High thinking I knew what strength looked like. I had been trained by some of the toughest people on earth, taught skills that most adults will never learn, prepared for situations that most of you can't imagine. She paused, remembering that first day when her grandmother's puzzle had shattered on the cafeteria floor. But I learned something here that no military instructor ever taught me, that the strongest people aren't the ones who can fight the hardest. They're the ones who can choose not to fight when fighting would be easy. They're the ones who use their strength to protect others, not to prove their own power. She looked directly at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. I learned that everyone carries invisible battles, hidden strengths, and untold stories of courage. When we take the time to see each other as complete human beings instead of convenient targets or social categories, we become stronger together than we ever could alone. Emma's voice grew stronger, carrying the authority she had earned through months of quiet leadership. My grandmother taught me that pozole is more than just soup, it's history, family, love served in a bowl. But this year, I learned that every family has recipes like that. Every culture has traditions worth celebrating. Every person has stories worth hearing. She gestured toward the diverse crowd of students and families filling the gymnasium. The bullies who mocked my lunch thought they were showing strength. But real strength is what happened next, when this school chose to celebrate our differences instead of weaponizing them. When former enemies became allies. When students who had been taught to compete started learning to collaborate. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Emma was thinking beyond the ceremony. Tomorrow she would return to her advanced military training, possibly facing real combat situations where the stakes would be life and death. But she would carry with her something more valuable than any tactical knowledge, the understanding that true victory comes not from defeating enemies, but from transforming them into friends. As she left the stage, Emma knew that her grandmother would be proud, not just of her achievements, but of how she had honored the lessons about strength, dignity, and the power of remaining human even in the face of cruelty. The shy girl who had once cleaned up spilled pozole in silence had found her voice. And in doing so, she had helped an entire school discover that their greatest strength lay not in their individual capabilities, but in their collective commitment to lifting each other up. Thank you for watching this powerful story of resilience, growth, and the transformative power of choosing compassion over conflict. Emma's journey from an isolated new student to a leader who revolutionized her school's culture shows us that true strength comes not from our ability to fight, but from our wisdom to know when not to fight. What did you think about how Emma handled the bullying situation? Have you ever witnessed someone transform a negative situation into an opportunity for positive change? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story inspired you to think differently about strength, courage, and the power of standing up for what's right, please give this video a like and share it with friends who might need this message. Every share helps spread the message that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. Don't forget to subscribe to Heartfelt Tales for more inspiring stories that celebrate the strength of the human spirit, the importance of cultural understanding, and the extraordinary courage found in ordinary people. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that could change your perspective or brighten your day. Remember, like Emma learned, we all have the power to transform conflict into connection, and our greatest victories come when we help others discover their own strength. Until next time, keep celebrating what makes each of us unique, and never underestimate the power of choosing understanding over judgment.